Warning, this podcast does not introduce any new information outside the Foundation's curriculum. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey there, friends and curious minds tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Real Doctors, Real Friends, the podcast that takes you on the behind-the-scenes tour of the world of medicine, one episode at a time. I'm Sana Samadi, your friendly second-year med student, juggling classes, late-night study sessions, shadowing, and occasionally getting a full night's sleep. Whether you just started your pre-med journey, already knee-deep in the med school chaos, or just simply fascinated by the mysteries of healthcare, you've landed in the right place. We're thrilled to be the first official podcast affiliated with the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry in Canada here at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta. Our goal is simple: to create a space where we can fully explore pertinent topics in healthcare. Whether you're a current med student, a hopeful pre-med, or just someone curious about the field, this podcast is for you. And let's be honest, staying up to date with healthcare news is more than just cramming for the MMI or prepping for exams. It's about understanding the ever-evolving landscape of medicine and how it affects our future as physicians or patients, or even our current role as students. Plus, for all you pre-meds out there, this could be a great way to prepare for those big interviews by diving into real-world topics. So sit back, relax, and make this educational journey a bit more fun and a lot less intimidating. Joining me are my co-host, Dr. Roshan Abraham, who knows his way around the primary care clinic like a pro, and Shereen Hamza, who can teach physiology in her sleep. How's everyone doing today?
Pretty good, Sana. I'm doing great. I'm just trying to keep up with the ever-changing world of healthcare. It's been a busy week in the clinic, even though I've been only there for a few days. And I love getting to discuss these important topics. And today's topic, anti-racism in medicine, is one that's crucial for all of us to understand. How about you, Shereen? What's been keeping you busy?
Hey everyone, I'm really looking forward to today's episode because it's such a vital discussion. We're not just here to talk shop. We're here to challenge the status quo and hopefully inspire some change. It's a big topic, but we're ready to dive in. Understanding the nuances of systemic racism is crucial for providing quality care to every patient. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Eniola Salami, an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Alberta. Dr. Salami is a leading voice in the areas of anti-racism, Black health, and medical education. She also plays a pivotal role as the Black Health Lead in the MD program at the University of Alberta. Dr. Salami's work focuses on addressing systemic anti-Black racism in healthcare and shaping the next generation of medical professionals to be more inclusive and equitable. Dr. Salami, we're honored to have you with us, and we're thrilled to hear your insights.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And to begin, can you just tell us first a bit about your journey and what kind of sparked your passion for advocating for anti-Black racism in healthcare?
So, my foray into anti-racism work was gradual. I would say I fell into it more than anything else. I don't really have the typical story of I've always been an advocate or someone who was in leadership positions from a young age or doing activism work as a youth. Growing up, I was really immersed in my immigrant community. I'm Nigerian Canadian, and so I witnessed firsthand some of the challenges my parents went through, aunts and uncles, people in the community, things like getting requalified for your profession, racism experienced every day, growing up in Calgary in the 90s, racist sentiments that we heard. And I remember feeling just a sense of injustice about it all, just that this is just not the way things should run. But not really knowing how to articulate that in a real way. And growing up, my parents were very big on education, which is, for many of us who are second generation or first generation immigrants, that is a common experience. And so really achievement was set up as this great equalizer. So in many ways, I thought that if you can game this system by being really excellent, you would be able to kind of surmount everything that's going on. And so it was really socialized amongst many of us to think that as long as you were head and shoulders above everyone else, you would be safe in a way. And this is a belief system that I carry with myself for a very long time. Because in many ways it worked for me and my family. You know, my parents battled their way through the job market. They eventually became professionals. We were upper middle class. We were comfortable. They taught me how to manage the interpersonal racism piece with grace, be classy, where they go low, you go high, that kind of business. And so I really only ever thought of injustices in that interpersonal sense, which that really changed when I started in university. I did a Bachelor of Health Sciences degree at U of C, and one of my minors was in political science. And so for the first time, I started to actually have language to articulate what I was experiencing. And I started to re-examine my life from a more critical lens. And so I began to awaken to the fact that achieving and excelling was in a defined box. So I was advancing, but there was a ceiling, like there was a stop. And I began to explore the idea that talent and grit only takes you so far, that there's something else at work that limits the movements you can make on this game board. I also started to think a bit more about my relationship to Blackness rather than just my relationship to being Nigerian, and getting that more expanded consciousness of how I interact with other Black people and that Pan-African understanding of where I am in the world. And I really started to interrogate the idea of meritocracy and challenge a lot of my own internal biases about who is a good type of Black person and who's an achieving type of Black person, and the whole idea of being a model minority. There was a lot that had to be unpacked. And my public health studies really forced me to look systemically at problems and think about how structures produce and reproduce ideas and behaviors. And so in many ways, that was the beginning of me gaining what I would call a critical consciousness. And so when I got into medical school, although I loved medical school overall, it was challenging for me. I had a lot of experiences that made me feel like an outsider. It really was intensified by moving away for the first time, going through a change model in like every aspect of my life, coming from the social sciences and suddenly taking anatomy and physiology classes. It just was all heightened. And so I just remember graduating from medical school and entering residency and just talking with my mom about like, this was an experience that had its good and its bad, but the bad is something that I don't want another Black student to experience. Right. And I never really thought of myself as a leader, but I think that that's when I started to think about like, what would it look like to be in leadership and actually do something about this? And so I wanted to do something rather than just trade stories and whine about it, but I didn't really know what that role would be. As I completed residency, I started to explore the idea of being in faculty and doing medical education more seriously. And so soon after completing residency, I had the opportunity to be Black Health Lead. And I got this role super early in my career. Like, I am a beginner in many senses of the word. Like, the introduction was lofty, but I'm very much in process, right?
How did that happen? Was it a posting? Or did somebody approach you?
It was a posting, and I just went for it. It was one of those impulsive decisions, I would say, which is not like me. But I was like, I've been talking about this for years. Maybe this is my chance. And
it's
so
the opportunity you're looking for.
Exactly. So I'm still a beginner. I'm constantly learning. I'm gaining skill. I'm gaining critical language. And so that leads to some pretty serious imposter syndrome at times. But it also allows me to stay humble. Like, I think that that's a superpower in a lot of ways, because this work will humble you, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be ready to stand corrected. You have to be assessed, critiqued. It's part of this. So you have to have a thick skin. You have to be willing to learn, grow, and change directions. But that's part of the joy of it. You're changing systems around you, but you're also being transformed and refined yourself. And so the more I learn about systemic anti-Black racism and how it manifests and how it affects people, the more my passion grows, because I learn about new areas where I can bring value. And I learn about new ways I can redefine my own experiences. It gives you a lot of clarity. I think that's really healing. So it's a privilege to be able to serve my community in this way.
Dr. Salami, your journey is incredibly inspiring. The way you articulate the transition from personal experience to professional advocacy really highlights the importance of addressing systemic issues from both individual and structural perspective. It's like you had to navigate a labyrinth to find your way, and now you're helping others find the exit. And I can't imagine how inspiring this might be to either undergraduate students, residents, pre-med students. It doesn't matter. I think just what you have just described could be really inspiring to a lot of people. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I think that story deeply resonates with many of us who've seen these struggles firsthand. I myself, my parents immigrated here. So it's that idea of you can work for anything and you can earn it. But that's fundamentally a very flawed idea. And it's how the system maintains itself. So there's that point. And I also found your background in political science just being kind of intriguing in that it kind of gave you the vocabulary to express yourself and express these ideas and articulate these systemic issues. And it's kind of that idea of there's a culture with 50 words for snow, and there's another culture, or English rather, languages it is, only has one word. So they have a deeper understanding of snow than we do. So it's kind of building the vocabulary to being able to articulate yourself is very important.
I like what you said about imposter syndrome. So, I won't say how many years and like how much maturity can pass, but sometimes that imposter syndrome, either it doesn't go away, it kind of stays dormant in the background, or with every new role, you kind of feel like an imposter. I can even say, like, as a parent, sometimes I feel like an imposter being masquerading as the responsible adult when I go to parent-teacher interviews and stuff like that. So even in academia and medicine, we feel it, especially when we're stepping into leadership and advocacy roles that carry a lot of responsibility with them, and particularly when you're mentoring young people coming up. But like you said, it's about staying humble. I love that. Being open to learning and changing as well, because these topics that we're going to be discussing today, they're not fixed. This is something which can change over time and should change over time. It's a continuous journey of growth and transformation. So your work is a testament to the power of perseverance and the impact that one person can have on dismantling systemic racism.
And it's not just about the immediate impact. It's about the ripple effects, how your work influences others, including myself, inspires change, and sets new standards. Speaking of which, Dr. Salami, how would you define systemic racism in healthcare? And what are some of the most common ways it shows up in medical practice?
So when I define systemic racism, I often use the definition put forward by Williams, Lawrence, and Davis. So they define it as the processes of racism that are embedded in laws, local, state, federal, this is an American definition, BT dubs, policies and practices of society and its institutions that provide advantages to racial groups deemed as superior, while differentially oppressing, disadvantaging, or otherwise neglecting racial groups that are viewed as inferior. So in this way, when we think about racism as being a defining feature of the systems we work in rather than a function of individual attitudes and sensibilities, which I think is often how people think about it. So too often we really focus on, is an individual racist? And we don't think about the system that molds them and develops them. And in many ways, it gets us caught in this perpetual cycle of laying blame, like find the bad guy. Like it becomes a game of find the bad guy rather than what makes this behavior acceptable. Why is this normal to us? Why do we think what we think? And so it really takes our focus away from the core of what actually makes us unequal. And so when you think about that in one area, then you want to think about anti-Black racism. So anti-Black racism was actually coined by Akwa Benjamin. So a scholar and professor that was at what's now called Toronto Metropolitan University. So she used anti-Black racism to define the experience of Black Canadians and how it was shaped by systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. And many people are actually not aware that this is a Canadian concept. So anti-Black racism is everywhere. It's gone all around the world. And this Black scholar who came up with this concept is often not credited. So I always like to make sure I highlight her because it's important. And so when we put these two concepts together, we can surmise that systemic anti-Black racism is the process of racism against Black peoples that is embedded in societal structures, norms, institutions, policies, laws, and language systems. This system works to disadvantage Black peoples and define them as inferior to other groups in society to their detriment. And so this in turn leads to deep and significant health inequities that we see produced and reproduced in many different contexts, not just in Canada. So These are very theoretical concepts, so I find that it's nice to bring it down to an example. So let's think about an example of how this actually plays out in medical practice. And so often I use race correction of something called the GFR, or the glomerular filtration rate, to exemplify this. And I'm going to break this down. Don't worry if you're like, what's a GFR? I will explain. So very simply put, your kidney is a filter. It filters your blood. So it basically strains your blood and keeps all of the good stuff in and gets rid of all the bad stuff in your pee, in your urine. And so in order to see how well your filter is working, doctors, scientists use a number called your glomerular filtration rate, and it tells you how well your kidney is filtering. The higher your GFR, the better your kidney works. The lower it is, the worse off your kidneys are. And so doctors use a specific formula to estimate what this rate is. And the value that determines whether someone is referred to a specialist, whether they receive life-saving care like dialysis or a kidney transplant. And so in this way, the GFR is part of the system that governs kidney care. So it's like a passport of sorts that helps you navigate a patient through the system of kidney care. What people often don't know is that the formula that was used to calculate this value was based on very small samples of people and studies that weren't necessarily of high quality. And so in these studies, the researchers concluded based on faulty evidence that Black people had a higher average filter rate than their white counterparts, and that their numbers were also different due to having more muscle mass, an assumption that is antiquated, has never, ever been proven by science. And that got embedded into that formula. And so what does this mean for Black patients? It means that their kidney function is persistently overestimated. So they were assumed to have better filtration than they actually had. And this led to Black people having kidney disease detected later, having higher rates of dialysis than their white counterparts, having less access to life-saving transplants, and all this led to higher rates of death from kidney disease for Black patients. Okay? And a lot of that information comes from an excellent resource by Uppel and colleagues, which we will be providing for you after this podcast is posted. And so here's the important part that brings all of this together. The individual doctors, nurses, pharmacists, scientists who are seeing Black patients, doing studies on Black patients, following that formula, a formula that denied them life-saving care in some cases, were not necessarily individually and interpersonally racist, right? Of course, some practitioners may have had implicit or explicit bias, but I reckon that the vast majority did not go into their office and say, I want Black people to have worse outcomes from kidney disease today, right? The racism was baked into the very system they were a part of. It was unconscious. It was like breathing air. They were taught this faulty science based on false assumptions about the body composition of Black peoples from the very beginning of their training. They were trained to see Black people as inherently biologically different from white people, even though race has no biological basis in fact. They were never taught that race was a construct, an idea, and not a biological reality. Their individual wills or intentions were no match for the rot at the root of that system, right? And so this is what we mean when we say a system is racist. The inequities are baked into the very functions of the institution. It's not about intentions and individual actors. It's about the structure of things. And so recently in Ontario, they've ended race correction for the GFR, which is a huge win. And that's actually going to help improve outcomes for individuals who have chronic kidney disease in that jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that breakdown is really eye-opening, but also very disturbing. And it's crazy how stuff like that can just kind of slip through the cracks. And that's something that's being taught in education today in 2024. And I remember for the listeners, Dr. Salami gave a couple lectures to my first year medical student class. And I remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, oh, didn't I hear some of this in high school? A couple, like just 4 or 5 years ago of these racial differences. So it's really interesting how long it takes for these outdated and biased assumptions to leave the medical practice. And it kind of underscores the importance of continually questioning and updating our medical guidelines and practices. It can be hard for kind of change to implement, but it's important. And I think that example really highlights it. And it's a reminder to be vigilant about the origins of our standards and why we follow them. What's the evidence? Is it actually there?
It's really incredible how something as critical as the GFR calculation can be so deeply flawed and have such devastating consequences. Dr. Salami, your explanation highlights how systemic racism isn't just about individual attitudes, but about the very framework of our medical practices.
It's very much like peeling back layers of an onion to reveal just how embedded these biases are. It's also a call to action for all of us in the medical field to actively seek out and dismantle these inequities. And I'm just thinking about the other roles of the kidneys and some contributions that can occur to the health outcomes of patients. So if we're not properly addressing kidney function, in addition to being a filter, the kidney plays important roles in the regulation of blood volume and blood pressure, and that could feed into increasing prevalence of hypertension, which could damage the kidney further, ultimately impacting its different functions and leading to worse outcomes overall. So very interesting how a small guideline can have a very strong impact in an individual and as well as a population.
And it's not just the historical context, but also the ongoing education that needs to be addressed. If we continue to teach these flawed methods without scrutiny, we perpetuate the cycle. Dr. Salami, your point about needing to educate ourselves and apply what we learn is so vital. It's like learning a new medical technique. We wouldn't want to keep using an outdated method if we knew it was harmful. So why should we do any less when it comes to addressing racism in healthcare?
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of brings us to our next important question here. Dr. Salami, so what are some practical ways that medical students and professionals can incorporate anti-racism in their practice and advocate for these systemic changes? Because it's kind of like you said, it's not like, well, for most people at least, they don't choose, oh, I'm going to be racist today. Rather, it's things that they may not be aware of or this systemic bias. So could you just tell us more about what are some practical ways?
I think the first step is allowing yourself to be open to the idea of being wrong. So wrong about what you thought about society, the world, the nature of fairness, merit, all of it. Until that happens, you can't really engage critically with your own position in society and your own biases. And you'll spend the whole time trying to defend yourself or to run away from being the bad guy, right? Because nobody likes to feel like they're wrong or they harbor ideas that are not charitable to other people, right? And so this can be a distraction from asking hard questions and entering into the deep mode of reflection that you require to do this work. And so step one is always being open, because you can't expose your biases to the light and examine them if you believe you don't have any. And so no one is exempt from self-reflection and analysis when it comes to this work. The vulnerability is a prerequisite for growth. And so I always say to people to really work on trying to be open first before you even engage. And then the second piece is to educate yourself. I think one of the most challenging things about this work is the amount of times that people want something spoon-fed to them. They'll be like, I want to be less racist, or I want to be anti-racist. Do it for me. and that's not how it works. So 1 million hours of force sensitivity modules is no match for 1 hour of critical self-directed reading, right? Like, I can module you to death. If you're not engaged and it's not coming from within, it's not going to do anything. And so there's so many places to learn about this. There's really no excuse to not engage with this, because so many people have done such great work creating modules for people. So whether it's the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, the Anti-Racism Learning Hub, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the U of A recently launched a massive open online course called Black Canadians, History, Presence, and Anti-Racist Futures that is free for everyone. It's a great starting point for learning about the Black experience in Canada. Actively seeking the information is a critical part of this, as you can never know everything. So I'm a Black woman. I have 32 years of visceral lived experience in Black skin in this country, and I don't know everything. I have to admit I don't know everything, even though I have the lived experience. You can't assume mastery. You have to continue to grow and expand your understanding. You can't just assume you know something, even if you've experienced it yourself, because there's a way to scholarly approach this, right? And then the third thing is to get skilled. So many modules and tools are available to give you the right language, ways to engage. push back against racism. We see, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta has, modules on anti-racism and microaggression. So those of us who are already medical students or who are already licensed practitioners here in Alberta have access to that. The University of Alberta has modules on anti-oppression and EDI that are freely available. And so doing these courses can give you the skills, but really the rubber hits the road when you start to practice, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like learning medicine. You have to practice it. It's like a muscle. You have to work it out. And when it comes to advocacy, I always find that that's kind of a tricky question because I'm still discovering what advocacy means for me. Like I'm still trying to understand what that looks like in my own unique experience. And I don't consider myself an expert by any means. But what I often ask myself when I do this work is, what will this cost me? If I'm doing work that costs me nothing, I don't have to take a risk, I don't have to give up a little so that someone else can have something, I don't think something real is happening. And real advocacy is about power exchange. We have to leverage the power we have in order to uplift other people. And so this can look like protesting, writing letters, lobbying, running for official leadership, but it can also look like saying no. It can also look like claiming rest for yourself in a system that seeks to extract things from you and sees you as a product. It can mean refusing to engage in systems that serve to reinforce inequities. I think that the best advice I received in my role is to never forget who you are in the work and who you are when it comes to advocacy. One of my collaborators shared that often when people get into advocacy roles based on passion and lived experience, they can lose their connectedness and authenticity with the community by getting bogged down in the bureaucracy of their position. And when you lose touch, you lose it all. You're no longer there for what you initially came into it for. And so staying connected to community and staying authentic in your advocacy is the antidote to that. So what I would say in terms of practical advice when it comes to advocacy is that you need to take some time to think critically about what your strengths and gifts are and what you naturally gravitate to. And then your next step is to meaningfully approach community and ask what their needs are. And the intersection of your gifts and their needs is where advocacy happens. So it's a self-reflective process, and it grows and changes over time as you get more skills, you get more education, as the community grows and changes around you. But it's that embeddedness that makes your advocacy authentic. And your progression in that role and in that space will not be linear. And it's not about what it looks like, it's about what you're actually making happen on the ground. Because sometimes these things can become very performative, where it's like, am I doing everything I need to do? Am I getting the numbers? It's not really about that. It's about, are you authentically making a difference that really speaks to what the community is asking for? And that's what I would say about the whole advocacy piece.
Yeah, I love that. That was said so beautifully. I love the bit about not wanting to have that information spoon-fed, because with so many other things like studying in medical school, you read a textbook, but some topic like anti-racism is just so personal and requires that deeper level of thinking and continuously questioning. And that's what's really required for updating our medical guidelines and practices, and just who we are as people is thinking beyond, of course, engaging with the modules, but also thinking beyond.
So absolutely, Sana. Dr. Salami, I love the analogy of developing these skills like a muscle. It's true. We need to practice, apply, and continually work on it to make meaningful progress. The resources you mentioned are fantastic starting points for anyone looking to deepen their understanding and get skilled. It's like in family medicine, where continuous education is key to staying updated and providing the best comprehensive care for our patients.
I agree. The part I really liked was about advocacy. I like the description of the intersection between gift and need of the community. I hadn't really thought of it that way before, so I really appreciate that. It's also interesting to think about advocacy as a means by which we can balance power and foster meaningful connections to the community. And it reminds me of the concept of staying grounded and remembering why we entered our field in the first place. And your advice about leveraging our strengths while asking what the community needs, so that intersection between gift and need is really thoughtful and effective in its approach. It's not about us, it's about making real impactful changes for others as well.
So speaking of pushing for a better system, let's talk about progress and hope. Dr. Salami, what promising developments give you hope in the fight against systemic anti-Black racism in healthcare?
Honestly, I think it's just collaborators. So I've had a really great experience working with people across the country on a bunch of initiatives, and being in community with other scholars who work in this area and who are passionate about it really galvanizes me. It gets me excited about what's in store for anti-racist initiatives in medical education. And I love all the associations that I've seen spring up over the years. So the Black Physicians of Canada, the Black Medical Students Association of Canada. I'm also really proud of our Black Medical Students Association. They do incredible work here, both in the community and in the faculty. And really through the creation of intentional community, both provincially and nationally, we've really seen incredible movement. Accreditation standards are changing. We're starting to see anti-discrimination, anti-racism, and anti-oppression in strategic plans and in curriculum. And so it's amazing to see how we've gone so far in such a short period of time. And so that gives me a lot of hope about what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. It's inspiring just hearing you talk about that. And of course, the work that's being done today is going to pave the way for a better, more equitable healthcare system tomorrow, so that maybe new students don't have to face the same injustices and barriers that past students had to. And it's always important to remember that unfortunately, it is a marathon and not a sprint, but every step does count, and it's great to hear about all those developments.
Yeah, very heartening to hear about these initiatives. And it's a reminder that even in a system as complex as healthcare, change is possible. For all the students and new professionals listening, this is your time to shine and make a difference.
It's all about being proactive and using your voice. Whether you're a student, resident, or attending physician, we're all part of this system, and we all have a role to play to make it better.
It doesn't even have to be grand gestures or anything really big. Sometimes small but consistent actions make the biggest difference.
And thank you so much, Dr. Salami, for that discussion. We are running out of time here, but before we actually let you go, here on RDRF, always at the end of our podcast, we do a friendship question to get to know our guests as people as well, in addition to the topics that they're talking about. So today's question for you is, if you could instantly master any skill that's not related to medicine, what would it be and why?
I would love to play a musical instrument. I was very sporty growing up, so I was a competitive swimmer for 10 years, and I couldn't even play a recorder. Like, I'm just not musically gifted. And so I was always really jealous of my friends who could write, compose, perform music. And so if I could pick any instrument, it'd definitely be piano, because I love classical music, so that would probably be my skill of choice.
I love that.
So I have that skill. So
okay,
I'm
don't brag.
No, but I'm going to take a skill that you have that I wish I had, which is the ability to cook really well. Because I don't actually do that well, and I really want to. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing it for my family, but I'm okay. But
Is it edible?
It's edible. No, it's edible. But
we may need a third-party opinion on that.
Eniola
Next
does
podcast.
Next podcast.
So she's a fantastic cook, and goes out of her way to learn. I mean, if we're talking about learning, like what you've told me in clinic about the time that you spend, like it's not even just like I am just so in awe of that desire to learn that much more about it. And yeah, I would love to be able to have that skill because I don't have it.
Yeah.
I don't. I enjoy doing it, but I don't have the skill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mine is mechanics.
Oh.
So I can do surgery and microsurgery no problem by now, but when it comes to my car or like an appliance that needs to be repaired in my house, I feel completely helpless.
So useful.
And like at
Can
the
I
mercy,
change mine? That is so useful.
Recorders are useful too.
I feel like I'm at the mercy of whatever repair shop or repair person that I am asking for help. So if I could master that, I would feel really happy, or at least to know what's wrong.
Right.
So yeah, I won't feel like a little bit suspicious that I'm being cheated or, or something. So yeah, mechanics, that would be mine.
Yeah. Just seeing the Olympics this year, every time I see the Olympics, I think to myself, why didn't I just start a sport when I was young? And I'm a little bit...
It's a trap, don't worry.
It is.
You're just going to be washed up by 30.
They're younger than me and getting gold medals. It's just,
Some are 11. Some are as young as
You're
11.
kidding.
Yeah, I think it's skateboarding or something
11?
like that.
Oh,
what are
very
we
young.
doing with our lives?
That's what I mean. It's so disheartening. So it's just, I would love to have started something earlier. And I'm maybe deluded, but I always say this to myself. I know that I could be in the Olympics if I tried. And I always tell this to my friend. I'm like 5'3", and I'm convinced that I could win long jump. Just the pure blind faith in myself.
Oh.
But yeah, thank you again, Dr. Salami. That was a fun question. But beyond that, this entire conversation has been just very enlightening and inspiring. And I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot. And I hope that they take these lessons to heart and continue to push for growth and change.
Absolutely. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, and to our listeners, we hope you found today's episode as insightful as we did. Don't forget to tune in next week for another deep dive into a fascinating healthcare topic.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, you know how to reach us. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning. We'll catch you next time.